Very welcome. And my name is Fergus Dolan, and I'm delighted to have Angus O'Riordan from Sperassi and the Dublin Adult Learning Centre. And Angus is going to be doing a presentation today on what we can do inside the class for life outside the class. So Angus will be going for 20-25 minutes, and then at the end, I'll ask you to type in your questions in the questions box, and he'll then deal with any questions. Okay, all the best, Angus.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Fergus. Great. Okay, let's see, guys. Just going to get this up and running. Here we go. Okay, lovely. So great to be with you all today. Delighted to be here, and thank you, Fergus, for asking me to be presenting today. And yeah, just to reiterate, my name is Angus O'Riordan, and I'm an ESOL tutor at Sperassi and the Dublin Adult Learning Centre. So yeah. Okay, so obviously it's a strange time to be talking about the classroom. I haven't been in a classroom myself for about almost 9 weeks, and I'm sure you guys are pretty similar, but I hope we will return there in some shape or form. Seems to be September at this stage. We'll find out more about that as we go along. So today we're going to be talking, guys, about what can we do inside the class for life outside of the class. Okay, looking at the content very quickly. We'll have a brief introduction. Then we're going to think about building an inclusive learning environment. Then we'll look at bringing the outside world in, moving on to incorporating skills for life, thinking about a class survey and how we can ask our learners, and then finally moving beyond the classroom and keeping in touch, which is something we're all learning about at the moment. Okay, so we'll get straight into it with the introduction. So obviously the classroom is such a busy space. You know, when we think of a classroom on a typical day, there's so much you're expected to teach, so many targets we're aiming to hit, questions we're trying to respond to. It's a lively, productive place. So just looking at some of the different things that might go on in a typical classroom, we're thinking about grammatical structures, vocabulary and word structure, syntax, pronunciation, phonological sounds, everyday or commonly used phrases, reading tasks, whether they be fictional, authentic, or adapted. So trying to bring all the 4 skills in, of course, writing tasks, and then we're thinking about all the various speaking tasks we do, conversation, dialogue, whether that be role plays as well, listening and oral exercises. So also even non-verbal language and gesticulation as well, how that plays a role in our communication, use of realia or real life materials, and then of course we might be doing continuous assessment as well. Usually, which is falls under the QQI umbrella, and then just in general the various interactions between teacher and student, and of course the students themselves. So a lot going on in any given day in a classroom, huge amount to take in for the learner and even for ourselves as tutors. Okay, so in that regard, it's good to step back, for the tutor to step back for a moment and maybe to think, to reflect upon some questions, and hopefully we're going to try and touch upon these questions today in the webinar as we go through it. So just looking here at 6 questions we might think about as tutors. So how can we gauge the needs and complexities of language and literacy use in a learner's daily life? Secondly, should we expect or assume language is being used outside of the classroom? Thirdly, how can we and our learning environment assist our learners to navigate the complex world outside? Fourthly, how can we help to maintain the motivation to learn? Moving on, does our role as tutor start and finish when we enter and leave the classroom? So those lines are certainly being blurred at the moment, and in general, it's probably a question that maybe maybe not falls on our own shoulders, but perhaps our coordinator or ALO might respond to that one. And finally, how can we make learning relative and meaningful to our learners' lives? So there's some of the questions, guys, that we might reflect upon as tutors. Just going back, I mean, the classroom is such a lively place. I think it's sometimes hard to gather your thoughts. So just to think about those questions as we go through the webinar today. Okay, so we're going to move on to the first point, which is about building an inclusive learning environment. And this is something, you know, there's a number of points in here. I think we're going to touch upon about 16 in total. But all inclusive, all together, we're aiming to build an inclusive learning environment so that the learner can really feel a part of the group, and by doing so, then feels a part of the world outside. You know, it's the idea that if they're comfortable within the learning environment, they can then bring it to the outside world and with greater confidence. So let's go through them here. So First and foremost, I think it's an obvious point in many ways, but something we need to do to remind ourselves of is know your learners. So to get to know them, know their background, their interests, their challenges, their aspirations, their goals, and what they want to achieve by coming to class. Also as well, a learning space which supports emotional well-being. So we know within ESOL there are a lot of vulnerabilities and anxieties among some of our learners. It's in my world, with the world I teach in, there are mostly asylum seekers and refugees. So we can assume automatically there are certainly some vulnerabilities there. So providing a space which supports that emotional well-being. Prepare your class and resources with the learners in front of you in mind. It might be an obvious point again, but it's just that within ESOL, so many groups are different. One group, when you move from one group to another, the same resources might not necessarily correlate to a certain degree. So prepare with your learners in mind. Strong student-teacher interaction. This point, the next point, point 5, which is going to something we'll think about throughout the webinar today, is to make it meaningful. So to reflect the learners' lives and make it applicable to the real world. There is a richness and familiarity, and make it relevant to the learner. So I guess this is something within ESOL which is quite particular within ESOL, whereby we're aiming to make our resources familiar to the learner, not something unfamiliar. Okay, allow learners to work at their own pace through differentiation. So this would be, I guess, you have different strengths and weaknesses within any ESOL class, that idea of the spiky profile. So perhaps all starting from the same point, but then additional materials for the stronger learners in the group. Set realistic and achievable goals. Obviously, don't overwhelm them. Accommodate different types of learner through multi-sensory strategies. So obviously, we're mostly using visual, but to remind ourselves to use auditory learning as well, and then the idea of kinesthetic learning, whereby we're just being creative as possible with our resources. Okay, so moving on, continuing with this area, building an inclusive learning environment continued. So classroom management, of course, vital. Allow for pair work or small groupings, and arrange the room how it may work best for your learners. Use explicit instruction, no ambiguity. Allow time to process the instruction. Regular positive constructive feedback. Again, we're talking about building confidence. Using recognizable images. So again, this familiarity. So there's a great richness in that, and you can see it in your learners' faces when you give them something and there's an image on it where they can recognize, they've seen before. It certainly brings them more to life than something that they don't recognize. So accessibility, using appropriate style, font, number of words, sentences per page, and highlight words if necessary. So just making your resources as accessible as possible to the learners in front of you. Building a language experience around a familiar topic. Of course, we know words need context. Utilizing the text as a springboard, as opposed to going into your class armed with grammar, perhaps pulling the grammar out and the vocab out of a text. And finally, allowing a lot of space and time for repetition, recap, recycling, and reinforcement. So just these number of points together, hopefully, a comfortable and inclusive learning environment with accessible resources should allow the learner to take ownership of their education and in turn become a more confident individual. And this, ideally, this is going to then relate to the outside world, and the learner will bring that confidence from the classroom to feel they're able to tackle and navigate themselves to a greater degree in the outside world. Okay, we're going to move on to the next point, which is about bringing the outside in. Okay, so not the fundamental principles of ESOL, but certainly some key principles of ESOL would be a necessity to function in a society, to build bridges and remove barriers, and to improve one's life, whether that be socially or economically. Okay, so not the be all end all, but certainly some of the key principles of ESOL for our learners. Okay, so for me, there's a really vital way of dealing with that is using topics and themes which reflect everyday life. So it's meaningful and it's relatable to our learners. Okay, and as a learning tool, the use of real life materials, or that phrase realia, which I heard way back when I did my TEFL training. But just the idea, I remember myself going from my TEFL world, which was kind of that glossy, glamorous TEFL world, into ESOL, and being kind of shown a material of a Tesco receipt way back when, and 5 questions scroll down beside the Tesco receipt. And I was kind of thinking at the time, God, it's a bit dull, and there's no color to it. But then, in hindsight, looking back on it, that really was, I suppose, a great learning curve from moving from the TEFL world to the ESOL world. It was real, It was something learners could recognize. They all had one in their pocket in some shape or form. So using that realia within the classroom. Now, of course, that material can be authentic or adapted to the various levels. I mean, personally, I would often adapt real life materials, but obviously we can use authentic ones as well, depending on the level and depending on what that resource is. Great springboard, and just below we can see some examples of what we might use in this, whether they be maps, menus, receipts, bills, flyers, leaflets, shopping catalogues, packaging, instruction, forms, bank statement even. Probably best not to use your own bank statement, but a bank statement. There are some online, I believe. So we're going to look at two examples, guys. We're going to look at a bus timetable. Now this would be an adapted one, but it's more or less as you see online. I adapted it slightly, but it is fairly authentic, and it's color, and we're using the icons that we normally relate to Dublin Bus. Okay, so it's nice and visual, it's clear. And then just on the right hand side, introduce some keywords that we could look at throughout the lesson. So we can see route, fare, terminus, passenger, public transport, ticket, and then leap card. So a nice visual, semi-authentic resource, which reflects something that they would be quite familiar with themselves. I'm sure would have seen at some stage in their daily lives. So how can we use that? What can we do with this this timetable? So we can think about potential areas of learning. Obviously, reading time, the 24-hour clock, days of the week, place names in the city or any city, Dublin in this case, keywords that we noticed earlier on, so words like terminus, fare, route, which can be again recycled right throughout the lesson and expanded upon as well, of course. An additional worksheet perhaps about recognizable signs and symbols related to public transport. There are so many. I mean, if you get on any form of public transport, you're greeted with lots of little symbols and signs everywhere. So to pull them out and to expand upon the timetable. The theme of transport in general and travel. So compare with learners' countries, a great variety there and a great springboard to discuss throughout the lesson. How do learners get from one place to another? And then, of course, a discussion around the cost of public transport in Ireland. Do learners use the Dublin mobile app? Dublin Bus mobile app, which a lot of them, I know a lot of the younger learners I would work with would use it, and they're quite familiar with it. It's amazing how they might have little language or literacy, but they're very good at using the mobile app, and it's quite learner friendly as well. So just a discussion around that, and then perhaps pulling out some grammar. So present simple for timetables and schedule. That's just one example of how some grammar we might pull out of the timetable. Okay, looking at another example. Shopping catalog, okay, something that we all see. I won't go into naming the name of the supermarket itself, just in case there's any issue around copyright. But we have these catalogs everywhere now. They're all competing with each other. The first thing I see when I look at is color. I mean, color is so precious within our world. We know that, and this immediately jumps out as being something colorful and greets the students. And again, students are always they often have one of these in their bag when they come to class. So a great thing to use. So how would we use that? What could we pull out from the shopping catalog? Potential areas of learning. So we might think about money, of course, prices. I noticed Nala posted something yesterday about the importance of numeracy when all this lockdown ends, and how the value of money is going to come so important back into people's lives again. So obviously numeracy is always a relevant topic. Food vocabulary, recipes often included in the catalog. So I mean, obviously we're going to isolate certain parts of the catalog. We're not going to use the whole thing at once. It would be too much for one learner, but to isolate different parts or even just a section of it. The theme of healthy eating, organic. I mean, the page I showed you there, a lot of range of organic produce. Here we can talk about organic versus non-organic, which is an interesting topic often in ESOL. I think for a lot of our learners, they're surprised by this world of organic, as most of the food in their country is automatically organic. So they're thinking about, oh, what is this this phrase organic? Fair trade. A couple of the products back there had the fair trade logo on it. The theme of budgeting and making a shopping list. I mean, every time we go now to the supermarket, we're told to make a shopping list to be in and out as quick as we can. Some key vocabulary that you will find within a catalog. So special offer, bigger value, while stocks last, organic, fair trade, healthy snacks, amazing weekly offers. So some of the things that will just jump off the page. Again, a springboard to discussion, how we shop around the world. And some of the grammar we might pull out of that would be about countable, uncountable nouns, use of some and any, how much, many, some WH questions, and indefinite pronouns. So there's lots we could do with that there. Okay, so just 2 examples, and of course, some of the examples I mentioned earlier, you know, an equal amount can be done with them as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to think about incorporating, excuse me, skills for life. And we're going to think about, obviously ESOL is not all encompassing, but it can assist greatly with functionality outside of the class and help our learners negotiate pathways beyond the classroom. We're going to think about it today just in terms of incorporating these skills for life into classroom assessments, namely QQI. And the reason being is that it tends to just enhance learner focus and enhance autonomous output as well. So if we can incorporate them in, not a necessity, but if we can incorporate them into our assessments, all the better. And I think within QQI, I mean, we do have a criteria, of course, but we are allowed a certain creativity and adaptability as tutors. So it kind of has its pluses and minuses, but I think it does allow us to be creative. So within QQ ESOL level 3, we might think about, and which I've used myself, recognizable images. So using signs and notices, again, familiar to the learner. Real life materials, so takeaway menu, perhaps adapted, or a shopping receipt again. Life skills, so understanding an informal letter or email, a letter from a family member or a friend, and everything that goes with it. And then everyday use, so social media icons and communication, how important they are in our world these days. And it's amazing how tech savvy a lot of our learners are without being necessarily overly confident with English language. They are often fairly capable with their smartphone, etc. So yeah, so 4 areas we could actually bring into the ESOL level 3 QQI. Okay, we're going to go through a little I suppose journey that I have used within my it's a level 5 ESOL class, which I know I do understand it's a high level. But I think it could be adapted again to lower levels. So just to run through this, and this would be considering moving beyond the ESOL classroom. You know, so when our learners are ready to graduate, you know, to think about where they might go next and how they might navigate that. So beginning with an open day poster, a further education and training open day poster, we were using in our class a lovely poster from Ballsbridge College. Again, creating that language experience. Then actually going to the open day, learners participate in an open day and get an opportunity to ask questions and meet lecturers and even do perhaps an initial assessment. Upon returning to the class, reflecting on the excursion with discussion and enhanced learning or language experience, excuse me. So again, bringing all they've learned back into the room. So that might be, those 3 might be sort of a preliminary for what we might go on the assessments then. So a reading assessment. Extracting information from the college website, so perhaps taking a couple of pages from the college website, not obviously the whole thing, and using that as an assessment tool then to extract information about the course they might be interested in. Then, of course, a writing assessment, so we can incorporate then a letter or email of inquiry seeking information from the college and everything that goes with that about using formal phrases and the layout and design of the email, the opening and closing formalities, and lots of positive personal affirmations in there as well. And then a reply letter then from a mock reply letter from the college, not a real one, or a mock one designed by ourselves, outlining requirements, again as a comprehension tool. Okay, and then we move on, just the other 2 more points, and we can then further down the road use that whole experience as a speaking assessment and as a mock interview for a place in college, you know, so that can be incorporated once again into our assessments, or not necessarily, but again, using that experience of going on the open day and writing the letter and getting the reply and then thinking about how they might approach an interview for a college place. And then finally, which was something we did in Sprassi, which was a really good, rich experience for our learners. We had a alumni or a returning student back into the classroom to share his experience of his journey from Sprassi into the world of further education and training. And actually it worked both ways. It was actually part of his criteria for college, and then also we had a great experience of hearing a personal journey of from the ESOL classroom into the further education world. So that was fantastic, and also worked as an oral activity. So all of this should assist in navigating a pathway for life beyond an ESOL classroom. Okay. Just to the right there, we can just see perhaps some further skills for life and assessments combined that I would use in level 4, well, level 5, and perhaps some in level 4. Creating a CV, of course, designing a cover letter, reading rules, regulations, and social norms in Ireland. That would be something maybe you could adapt from the Citizens Information website. Reading consumer rights, again, adapted from an authentic piece. Reading, understanding a bank statement. And with something which I used was reading a migration report from the CSO, which they have a sort of a shortened version, not obviously the full report, but a shortened version of their report, which actually worked really well in the classroom. And I guess that whole idea of migration is relevant to our learners, and they seem to take a keen interest in it as is. So just some ideas there for incorporating some, I suppose, more formal skills in skills for life into the classroom. And then, of course, just finally thinking about more informal skills. So incorporate commonly heard everyday phrases as much as possible into the classroom. I think this is something that often brings our learners to life. You know, they come into the room and they talk about, oh, you know, teacher, I heard someone say this phrase today on the bus. So I think brainstorming is a great way to initiate this. Elicit from them, you know, what have they heard? And they often think about these phrases that sound like one word to them, but can be broken up into multiple words. So to brainstorm initially, and then perhaps we can, you know, mock some of these conversations through role plays. Again, highlighting colloquial regional greetings. I mean, Fergus there was chatting to someone from Limerick, from Leitrim, from Clare. So we all have our colloquial ways of saying hello and goodbye. When I go to half my family are from Kerry, and when I go to Kerry, I always take great pleasure hearing their way of saying hello and goodbye. It's a great pleasure. So and then sorry, so number 4, picking apart condensed sounding everyday phrases. So as I say, these often sound like one phrase to our learners, but picking them apart and thinking what are these people saying. Using mock voicemail recordings, mock text or WhatsApp messages, social invitations, informal directions, and just general small talk that you might use at the bus stop or, you know, in a cafe, etc., etc. So just some ideas, I think, about bringing the commonly word everyday phrases into the classroom as much as possible, and genuinely think they get a good kick out of that. I remember doing a lesson on Dublin slang, and we had a good laugh about that one. Okay, so moving on to the next stage, we're going to think about. So I suppose one of the questions we saw initially was, you know, how much language does a learner use or need outside of the classroom? We never really know without, I suppose, asking them. I mean, I suppose the simple way is to find out from them how much they use or need. Again, it comes back to our original point about knowing your learners. You know, now of course we'll touch upon perhaps some of the sensitivities around asking them in a moment, but just in general, I think you know, they can provide us with as much information as possible. So in the form of a classroom survey or questionnaire. So language and literacy use outside of the classroom. Why? I mean, it can help gauge many things, but just some important things. Key aspects and necessities of language and literacy, the learner's level of understanding, diversity of daily interactions, whether they be voluntary or not, and areas which can be targeted in the classroom. Okay. So obviously, as mentioned, there could be and probably will be some concerns from learners, and perhaps some ethical issues which should be flagged. So there might maybe some sensitivity around some questions. What is the purpose of the questionnaire? How the information will be shared? Issue of confidentiality and anonymity. Where the information may be shared or end up, of course, and maybe beyond. And then considerations for facilitators should include, of course, clarity around the purpose of the questionnaire, where and how the information will be used or shared, emphasis on the voluntary and anonymous aspect of it. Obviously, we won't push them into it. Responding clearly and adequately to all concerns, and clear instruction and guidance at all times. If you do, you know, partake in a questionnaire in the classroom, which I've done, but obviously these things need to be just flagged before we do any of that. So areas of inquiry could include, these are the ones I included in my own one, using language, how we use language in everyday public interactions, using language to inquire as a customer, language at home, what do you talk about in English, or do you even talk at home in English, language for medical purposes, language for housing purposes, language for accessing financial support, literacy in everyday life, and language and literacy in the information or digital age. And obviously we're not going very deep on these issues, and obviously some of them are very personal and private to people. So just really to touch upon each area and to try and gauge a feel of how they use them, and how they themselves would rate their understanding of these areas. So just a quick short sample of the survey I use, and this is how I designed my one. Nice and clear. I used adverbs of frequency just to as a box ticking or a multiple choice activity, and they just circled their answer which they felt most comfortable with. Obviously we prepped the vocab, a lot of the vocab before, and of course went over our adverbs of frequency again. But these are just 5 simple questions that I would have used in my using language in everyday public interaction. It's only a sample. It would have continued on down. I think it may be 15 questions in total. And then just they had to circle which one. Now, of course, there's going to be some ambiguity around, are they being honest? Are they being, do they understand the question? But I suppose, you have to take that as with any survey or questionnaire that's done. Okay, so what can we learn from that? I guess in general, the value of learner responses presents a more rounded picture of the learner. Information can feed into our resource and material development. The education centre as a whole can grasp the complexities of the daily lives of an ESOL learner. Are there further supports needed? I know within SPRASI we have a psychosocial officer, for example. So sometimes we can learn a lot from about the learner, and perhaps there are more supports needed, or point them in the right direction anyway, at least. Feedback to funders on the vital importance of ESOL provision. Sometimes if we have some kind of survey done, it works as a negotiation tool for our funders. And learners can, of course, which is probably maybe the most vital point, learners can self-reflect on how much language they use daily themselves. So it's obviously a self-reflection tool for they themselves. So, and my email is at the end. So if anyone keen to get a copy of my own survey, I can send it out to them, or I can perhaps send it on to Fergus with the slides. Okay, moving to the last point, which is about beyond the classroom. Now, obviously, the fundamental question is, should we support our learners outside of the classroom? And that really is a question for the tutor themselves, and perhaps their coordinator, their supervisor, their ALO, whoever it is that is responsible. And obviously there's a lot of issues around GDPR, and there's policy in certain centres around this about keeping in contact. And look, we're all coming to terms with this. I think in general, I've written here, we've now all become experts, which I certainly feel in the last 8 or 9 weeks, I've begun to tackle this in a big way. And look, we all have our own way of I think we all find our own platform which we're most comfortable with. And these are things where some of them are more common than others. So WhatsApp, Google Classroom. I haven't used Google Classroom myself. WhatsApp, of course. Moodle. I've used Zoom. Had an interesting Zoom class this morning. It seems to be going well. I think the more we do on Zoom, the more I do on Zoom, I feel more comfortable with it. Microsoft Teams, Google Duo, which I don't rate very, very, very highly, but that's just my own personal opinion. Now, just to mention again, of course, anything we do like this, there are GDPR issues. But I think it's important that we educate ourselves as tutors, and this is a perfect time to do it. And then, of course, we can assist our learners. I mean, learners are always looking for extra stuff outside of the classroom, and it's a minefield out there in terms of online resources. Some good, some terrible. So if we can maybe educate ourselves and assist our learners to wade through this and help them find their best fit. So I think at the moment luckily there are a lot of interesting educational online resources that are free at the moment, and I would say take advantage. I certainly plan to. I haven't been as productive as I'd like to be, but I certainly will aim to download some for later use when we get back to the classroom, hopefully in September. So, but just one I wanted to mention today was the one called Edmodo, and I think this is one I've used. Again, look, it does favour perhaps a stronger learner to a certain degree, but I think it can be used with a variety of levels. I would say from A2 upwards, perhaps. But just it sells itself as the world's largest learning community. Obviously, it connects learners with tutors, but there's a couple of good advantageous points to it. It has a sort of a user-friendly Facebook-style platform, which a lot of learners are used to, particularly our younger learners. The tutor has individualized access to multiple groups, which is nice as well. So you can have a whole range of groups. They don't have access to each other, but you have individual access to them. The tutor can add learners for a particular group without any personal contact details exchanged. I think that's what makes it most attractive. for many people is that it avoids that GDPR field to a certain degree, because you're not sharing contact details, you know. Learners can log into their group whenever they like from any device, whether it be mobile, laptop, tablet, or PC. There's a nice little kind of minion looking icon on your mobile. And tutors, of course, can post anything from articles to links to worksheets, resources, assignments, quizzes, videos, etc. So there's just so much a tutor can post on it, and learners can dip in and out of it as they will. And I think fundamentally it's safe, secure, and it's a non-personalized way of keeping in contact with our learners, if you so choose to, outside of the classroom, which is again a question for all of us, a personal question for all of us. So that's it, guys. I'm just looking at my own time here. I'm kind of gone over slightly, so I'm gonna say thank you kindly for that. And there is my email, that you can contact me with any questions. I know I went through it pretty quickly there, but want to try and hit as many points as possible with you